Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our session today. We have some great speakers lined up for you. Can everybody hear me in the back, or do I need to move closer? Okay, great. So my name is Laura Hodgson. I'm a senior planner at the Department of Commerce. I am joined by our superstar local planners today who are going to talk about how we work from the planning side of things to allow developers to come in and build more affordable housing types, particularly in light of what we know is the housing crisis and a significant need for housing out there. So I'd like to introduce my speakers here, and then I'll start the presentation. I will be quick in my piece to let these speakers present for the most part, but we're going to try to leave at least 5 or 10 minutes at the end for Q&A, and if not, I know that they would be happy to answer questions afterwards. So first we have Ted Richardson from the city of Tacoma. He'll be talking about their multifamily tax exemption program and a number of innovative affordable housing incentive programs that they have. Then we have Alex Hunt from the city of Burien and Joyce Phillips from the city of Olympia. We chose local expertise for you today, and hopefully that'll be applicable to what you do. Just before I dive in, I think most of you know the Department of Commerce, particularly in the lens of housing, particularly our housing division, but we also support communities in all of the ways on the screen, and we encourage you to check that out on our website or ask us, and we can connect you with the right person. So I'd like to start today with the state planning framework that sets the stage for housing to be built in our communities. So right now is a really critical time as we planners across the state are engaging in our comprehensive periodic updates. So they'll be updating their comprehensive plans and development regulations over the next 4 years, and this sets the stage for what communities can build in their community and set the stage for the next 20 years of growth in our communities. So it's an important time to pay attention to what local governments are doing in their comprehensive times, and it's a great opportunity to provide your input. As you see here, the updates are done on a rolling basis, starting with the Puget Sound region. Sorry? Nope. Followed then by the counties and cities in green, and then those in gray, and then following up with those in blue. I think most of you know this, so I'm going to, as I mentioned, breeze through this, but the legislature made significant changes, not only in 2023, as we heard from the Year of Housing, but in 2021 with House Bill 1220. And this was, if you're not aware of it, a significant bill in terms of what it will mean for communities changing their regulations that allow housing on the ground. It changed the goal for communities as they plan for the statewide goal for planning from plan for and accommodate to plan for and accommodate from encourage the availability of affordable housing. And that puts more onus on local governments to make sure they're providing a more active role in planning for affordable housing. It directed the Department of Commerce for the first time to project future housing needs for every community in Washington, and to do so broken down by income level. So now communities not only have a target for the number of housing units they need to plan for, they need to understand what those housing units mean for the affordability level, what people can afford in each of those housing units. And what that shows is significant need for lower income housing needs, as I'm sure most of you in this room are aware. And communities will need to do more work to show that they are providing the framework to allow that housing to be built. Today, we'd like to focus on what jurisdictions are doing to remove those barriers to affordable housing and provide the framework to allow that affordable housing to be built. But there are a lot of other pieces with this, and I'm happy to share more when we have recordings of all of this on our website. But what those projected housing needs look like is, on a statewide level, is 1.1 million new homes. And to address the fact that most residents are 30% or more of residents in Washington are cost burden, we really need to provide more housing at the lower income housing segments. From a planning perspective, coming from the side of an urban planner, we have tools to help with that, but we have to get creative. And this is where we have our experts here to talk to you about how local governments are getting creative to meet those affordable housing needs in the framework that they allow from local governments. So a few pieces about what local governments will be doing over the next few years. One thing is they will be making sure they have land capacity for all of these housing needs that we've identified. For the first time, this means that jurisdictions will have to be taken into account. What does that land capacity mean from an affordability perspective? If you say that you can build 100 units in a certain section of town, what type of units are those? Are they affordable to those who need those units in your community? If not, you need to make sure that you provide the framework and the on-the-ground zoning that would allow the more affordable housing types. We know, most of you know from as affordable housing developers or advocates, that the typical way we've been planning for homes in Washington and across the United States is not affordable. Our typical quarter-acre single-family lot home is not affordable to most residents. We'll need to allow a variety of housing types, more density in our jurisdictions, particularly in areas around transit and services, to allow for more affordable housing. So jurisdictions will be, if they identify that they have insufficient capacity for housing and at the densities that are more affordable to residents, then they'll be needing to make zoning changes. And this is where it's important to be paying attention to what your local governments will be doing. But in addition to that, local governments are also asked under the new framework for comprehensive plans to identify those barriers that are preventing affordable housing from being built. We know not only what zones allow housing, prevent affordable housing to be built, but also other regulations. For example, the fee structures, impact fees, the amount of parking that each unit has, the design review requirements. All of those different things that hold up a process, how long it takes you to get through permitting. There's a lot of barriers to affordable housing out there, and the legislature has now asked local governments to review what those barriers are and identify actions to remove those barriers. So it's an important time to come to the table and to help local governments identify those and create an action plan to remove those barriers. And to really meet those housing needs that I mentioned, we have that significant housing need at the lower income housing segments. We're going to have to start getting creative. Local governments have a variety of tools that they can use to encourage affordable housing. They have can adopt affordable housing incentive programs, and in doing so, that tool that they have to allow that affordability for 50 years. So there's a number of items that you see here on the screen: density bonuses, height and bulk bonuses, fee waivers, parking reductions. These are types of things that local governments are doing and are going to be looking at to encourage affordable housing moving forward. And there are also more creative ideas, which some of our speakers will be talking about now. So one thing to keep in mind is as comprehensive plans are moving forward, what are those tools that your local government is not currently employing that would help to leverage more affordable housing in your community, and help them to identify those and include those in their comprehensive plan. One thing that we have as a tool to understand what those affordable housing incentives that are most effective is a tool survey that the Puget Sound Regional Council did in 2022, and 2019 and 2022, which surveyed jurisdictions in King County, Snohomish, Kitsap, and Pierce County to understand what are those affordable housing tools that are going to help meet our lowest income housing needs. From a planning perspective, we found that the multifamily property tax exemption program, which basically gives developers tax exemption for 12 years if they provide affordable housing, is one of the most effective tools to creating multifamily housing and creating affordable housing. Other tools that are most effective or most widely used jurisdictions are parking reduction requirements, which Joyce, I think, will be touching on a little bit, and density bonuses. But again, there's options for creativity here and the next comprehensive plan update, and we encourage you to take what these great speakers are going to share and encourage your local governments to adopt and create an action plan to create these affordable housing incentive programs and remove barriers to affordable housing. And with that, I'd like to transfer to Ted.
Hi, everybody. Can everyone hear me? Okay. All right, I'll stand straight up. I have to work on my posture. So my name is Ted Richardson. I work for the city of Tacoma. I think it's the best city in Washington, so I'm glad you all get to spend 2 days in the best city in Washington, but I might be biased. I'll admit I'm not a planner. I guess I would call myself a policy nerd. So my job is to know a little bit about everything we do as a municipal government that touches affordable housing, but I'm not the expert in any one of those things. I did see for some reason a few of my colleagues are in the crowd, so if you ask me any hard questions, I might call a lifeline. So let me learn how to change the slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 different incentives we offer. The last one we're actually currently in the process of developing. And I'll say right now that most of these are how we work together with the private market to get affordable units into those otherwise multifamily developments. And so I'll be frank, this is not our strategy for getting deeply affordable units. Those units that are at 0% AMI, 30% AMI, up to 50%, this is not how we're going to get those units. Those units are going to require direct money, direct subsidies, and other government or philanthropic help, and we need that. The private market's just not going to be able to build those units and then be able to make their projects pencil. And so if we were to require that, they're just not going to build anything. And so this is really how we get that was on that chart that had that left to right graph with the little pictures. This is how we get those multiplex units and some affordable units in those bigger buildings that was at I think it was 50 to 120% AMI. We're really focused on right in the middle there, about 70 or 80% AMI. So I'll talk about 3 programs: our multifamily tax exemption, which is, you can do it statewide, our priority review permitting, which is basically how do we get permits done quicker through the process so that the affordable units come online sooner so that someone can actually start living in it and then benefiting from having to pay less money living in that unit. And then finally, we're currently working on putting in place affordability bonuses for our new middle housing that will become law next year. That's part of HB 1110, but we're also doing a bit denser middle housing in our corridors. So I'll talk a little bit about that decision-making process that we're going through and how we structure those bonuses. So first is the multifamily tax exemption. We always call it the MFTE. And so as Laura was saying, it's essentially like, I think of it as kind of being at the bargaining table with the developer, is you don't have to pay property taxes for this many years. What are you going to give me in return? And that's how a lot of these incentives work, is it's essentially a trade. And so you'll see there's 8, 12, or 20 years. 8, they don't actually have to give us anything. But they build buildings, and so they get units. The 12-year is they get 12 years of not paying property taxes. In exchange, we get 20% of their units are affordable at 70% of the area median income for rentals, and then 115, I think is what it says, for ownership. They always build the rental units. And then we have the 20-year on the books. No one's ever used it, so we don't really think about it that often. But you can see that it's just, they get 20 years of not paying property taxes. More units are affordable, and the big change there is that they actually have to be affordable forever, not just the length of the tax exemption. And so maybe that's why we don't get anyone doing it. But we're hopeful that in the future we'll get some, because that's more the length than we want, because 12 years of affordability honestly is not that long. So this is by far, as Laura said, our most successful incentive for creating affordable units. You can see the numbers on the screen there. I haven't memorized them, but I guess I can read them to you. 244 units created so far at that 70% AMI level, and then another 529 that are coming. And then most of the projects that are in the pipeline right now, previously they were mostly those 8-year exemptions. Most of them have switched now to be the 12-year exemptions. So you can see that 20 out of the current 27 that have recently been passed by council were the 12-year exemptions. So we're excited that more developers are utilizing this tool, and that they're utilizing the tool that actually gives us some affordability. And then finally, I'll say that 70% AMI is actually not that cheap. I looked at our most recent one that council adopted. The market rate units were $1,500. The affordable units were $1,450. So But I will say from personal experience, I did live in one of these units for 4 years, a number of years ago when I was in Seattle. I didn't have to pay utilities. So for those 4 years, I saved who knows how many thousands of dollars. And then my rent was stabilized because it was tied to the income of the county. Whereas in 2021, we saw a lot of rents go up by 20% or more. That was never going to happen to me because unless hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of really, really rich people move to the county, the AMI is not going to go up by so much that my rent would have gone up by that much. So you don't pay utilities and your rent is fairly stable. So I think those are two less talked about reasons for why this program does create affordability. But yeah, 70% AMI is, we call it regulated rent because honestly the community got really upset with us for calling it affordable. So we're currently expanding this tool geographically because it's been very successful. So previously the 12-year was only offered in our really, really dense areas like where we are right now. So we didn't expand where the 8-year is because we want more people to use the 12-year, but we're expanding it along our corridors and what we call neighborhood nodes. You could think of a little intersection with maybe a bar and a laundromat on it. That's a node. And then we're also beginning to work with developers whose 8-year exemptions are expiring, and then we're encouraging them to renew their exemptions, but for another 12 years. They just have to transition 20% of their units from market rate to affordable. And so they're very interested in doing that. It's just the logistics of transitioning, because they can't go and say, hey, you make too much money, get out of my building. But how do we actually work through that transition? But we can create more affordable units in renewing those exemptions. Okay, so our priority review permitting, I actually see Dustin in the crowd, so I'll call him out as our staff member who runs this program. But so if you have really detailed questions, I might tell you to talk to him afterwards. Hi, Dustin. But so how this works is the permitting process can take a long time, and we want it to take less time for affordable housing projects. Well, we'd like it to take less time for all projects, but specifically for affordable housing projects. And so the goal is for these projects to move through our permitting process 50% faster. They currently move through the process about 25% faster. So that's good, but we can do better. And so the main thing is we have a staff member who runs this program. And so I know that Tacoma is a pretty big municipality. We're the 3rd biggest city in the state. And so having a dedicated staff member to just help shepherd these projects through the permitting process might not be realistic for smaller cities. That's fine. A big part of the job is advocating for the projects, being that point of contact, and then I guess I would honestly call it cat herding of the other departments that also have to look at the permits. And so you wouldn't necessarily need a staff member at a smaller city who's dedicated to this work. It could be someone doing it part-time because you're probably going to have less projects coming through. And it's really that internal advocacy and keeping those other permitting staff in other departments like traffic or the utilities or our real property services, keeping them in line and reminding them of why getting these projects through the process sooner is important, because it can save developers money, so hopefully maybe they'll lower the rents, but it just gets the units built sooner, and so someone can move into the units sooner. So the main benefit of this program is having that staff member dedicated to this work, but there are a few others. So projects receive comments very early on in the process so they can better plan the rest of the permitting process, so that speeds it up. And then there is some fee waivers involved for really designated affordable housing projects like the Housing Authority or Habitat or others who are really, they're only building affordable housing. The fee waivers are a few $1,000, so it's not like it's going to save their project, but it helps. And then the time savings, the sooner it gets done, the better. And then, so finally, this is work we're doing right now If you're really interested, in 2 weeks we have a planning commission meeting. We're going to be presenting our affordability bonuses. I would encourage you all to come back to Tacoma for our planning commission meeting. It's going to be really exciting. So as every city now has to upzone through HB 1110, we've been in the process for 3 years, I think, 3 years in going through our upzone process, doing a ton of community engagement, trying to get every detail perfect, which of course we will get every detail perfect. So it's all those residential areas that we're upzoning. Some of them we call low scale, which will go from single family residencies up to allowing either 6 or 8 units. And then we have these mid-scale areas that are basically the corridors that'll go to 3 and 4 story apartment buildings. So can we and how do we get some affordability built into these new lower scale areas versus just getting the affordability built into the larger apartment buildings in downtown or the mall or the more dense parts of Tacoma? So I don't have all the answers, but we're working through that process right now. So on this slide are all the considerations that we're having to work through in how we structure these bonuses. So if you're thinking about doing similar bonuses, this list is most of what you're going to have to think about. So the first is the developer's going to give you affordable units. What are you going to give the developer? So we've settled mostly on denser buildings, taller buildings, and then reduced parking. These are honestly the easiest things for us to give the developer because it doesn't cost me money as a city to allow you to have less parking. That's just something that I'm allowed to give you. I don't have to pay for it. Now, I've heard the developers would actually prefer us building the infrastructure so they don't have to build it, or more tax exemptions. That makes sense because that's actual money. We don't have the money to do that, but we would like to have the money to do that. So maybe eventually we'll be able to work towards that. But right now, the easiest incentives for us to give are those ones that don't cost us anything: density, height, and less parking. How affordable are the units going to be? How long will they be affordable for? How many of the units in the building need to be affordable? And then at what income level? And these, the longer you require them to be affordable, you might not be able to require that they're as deeply affordable in terms of income. So there's trade-offs there. Or you could require that they're very, very affordable, very cheap units, but only for a few years. So how do you structure those 3 components correctly? Mandatory or voluntary? Is this going to be mandatory inclusionary zoning where they have to put the units in? Or is this going to be voluntary where you kind of hope that they put the units in? Mandatory is riskier because if you make the requirement too strict, they're just not going to build anything, and then you get no housing. Voluntary is less risky, but it's less reward because some developers are just going to choose to not put any affordable units in. And then if you do mandatory, what's the minimum threshold of units that it applies to? And then are you going to allow developers a way to get out of the requirement and still receive the bonus? A lot of cities have what's called a fee in lieu. So essentially, I allow you to build a bigger, taller building with less parking, but then you give me money. And then I can use that money. We put it into our housing trust fund so that we put it towards building designated affordable units. Like we would then give that money to Habitat or Mercy or the Low Income Housing Institute or others that are building those deeper affordable units in our community. This is good in that it helps us build those 30% AMI units. It's bad in that it concentrates those units in buildings and doesn't spread out those affordable units throughout the community. And so as Leah was talking about in the morning speech, we need to try to break down segregation. And so having those units actually being built by the developer in the communities across Tacoma is one way to break down the segregation. The fee does the opposite because it allows us to fund the units, which is great, but they're all built in one place. And then finally, monitoring. How are you going to actually confirm 5 years after these units are built that they're still being offered at an affordable rate? That costs money. That takes time. And that's not easy and it's not cheap. If there's any budding entrepreneurs out there, we kind of think that this might be an opportunity for a business venture where cities across Washington pay you to do their monitoring for them, because they might have the expertise or the staff to do that. So wink, wink. And then finally, I'll just say that, like, if you were to ask me what affordability levels are we going to do, that might help you make your decision, but please don't replicate what we're doing because your market might be a little bit different than ours. So you need to do some level of market analysis in structuring this type of tool. I think that's all. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ted. Can everyone hear me all right? Yep. Great. My name is Alex Hunt. I'm a senior planner with the city of Burien. It's good to see everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm going to be sharing some information on Burien's Affordable Housing Demonstration Program. This is a program we've been using for the last few years to incentivize and facilitate affordable housing development in Burien, and has allowed developers to get pretty flexible and creative with the way that they provide affordable housing in Burien. So just a little bit about how this program came to be. Since 2003, Burien has had a policy in the housing element of our comprehensive plan, directing the city to create a demonstration housing program to test innovative residential designs that would encourage affordable housing production. And this pilot program should test alternative development standards that increase the diversity of housing types and levels of affordability. So that had been sitting in our comprehensive plan since 2003. And then 16 years later, our council decided to take action and implement that program. So that was a very exciting step, a long time coming. So the zoning code was amended in 2019 to actually provide a way for us to administer this affordable housing demonstration program to get more affordable units into the city of Burien. So what does the program actually do? This program allows for basically code flexibility in exchange for affordability. So we're allowing a really wide range of housing types in areas where they wouldn't otherwise be allowed under our current zoning code. So the housing types identified in this program are cottage housing, single family housing, duplexes, triplexes, stacked flats, modular units, congregate housing, tiny houses, and mixed use. And any one of these housing types under this program would be allowed in any zone that allows residential uses within the city of Burien. So we're really opening up the door for a variety of housing types. We're also, in addition to just broadening the land uses allowed under this program, we're providing flexibility from development regulations. So projects that come in under this program would have the option to be granted flexibility from things like setbacks, density requirements, building heights, other site improvements like landscaping, recreation space. So working with developers to create flexibility in our typical development regulations. And then, in exchange for all this flexibility, we are establishing those affordability requirements. So under this program, we're pursuing a bit deeper affordability levels. So all of the projects within this program would have to be affordable to those making or households making 50% or less of King County area median income. And that would be with a 50-year affordability term to ensure that we're getting long-term affordability for these projects. So how does the program work? Under this demonstration program, we are admitting 5 projects into the program. We've admitted 3 so far. And we're requiring that there be a minimum distance of 1,500 feet between demonstration projects, and the program will expire at the end of 2024. So in order to be admitted into the program, a housing developer needs to make contact with the city and make a formal application, and then we move them through a process where we do kind of a preliminary analysis of the proposal and introduce it to the Planning Commission and City Council, and the City Council formally approves the project for the demonstration program by resolution. So that's how they kind of get in the door to be admitted into the program. Throughout the process, the projects need to hold 2 neighborhood meetings and those get, involve property owners and residents within 1,000 feet of the project site. And then in the demonstration program, one of the 5 projects needs to be affordable to households making 0 to 30% of the area median income, so an even deeper affordability level for at least one of those projects. So that's just a little bit about how we actually administer the program from the city administration side of things. And then we've actually been, fortunate to have 3 projects come in and be admitted into this affordable housing demonstration program. So I'll just give you some information about those 3 projects. The first project to be admitted was a Habitat for Humanity project. This was located on a large lot zoned for single-family residential, and the proposal there is 40 owner-occupied townhome units, again, affordable to households making 50% or less of the King County area median income. And this uses a housing trust model that was mentioned during the keynote speech earlier. And the actual site layout is a mixture of 2-level townhomes and 3-level multifamily structures. So that was approved into the program in 2020, and that picture on the right-hand side there is just from a couple of months ago. That's a semi-recent picture of their progress. So they've gotten all their building permits. They've gone through all the permitting. They've done their clearing and grading, so we're excited to start to see some structures go up on that site soon. So that was the first project to be admitted into this program. The second was Downtown Emergency Service Center, or DESC. This is a parcel located right in downtown Burien. It's a 6-story project with 95 units of permanent supportive housing. So this checks our box for being affordable to the 0 to 30% area median income level. So this is a really exciting project for us. It's really well-sited, permanent supportive housing with wonderful access to services and public transportation. It's within walking distance of Burien's Transportation Center and Transit Center. So that was another really exciting addition to kind of our program here. And then that is a recent construction picture. They've actually started raising the structure on this, so making really good progress there. And then the most recent project to be admitted into the program is EcoThrive. So this is another lot that's zoned for single-family residential development, and their proposal is cottage-style units. So detached cottages with shared community spaces, and this would be 27 owner-occupied units, again, using that land trust model of ownership, and affordable to households making 50% or less of the area median income. And this was approved to be accepted into the program earlier this year. They're going through their land use review right now, so going through all the necessary permitting to get this permitted and built. So we're so excited that this project has seen, or this program has seen success in the last 3 years of getting more units on the way to being available in Burien. So some of the benefits of this program, obviously, more affordable housing. We're getting affordable housing at deeper affordability levels, which, as a lot of you probably have experience with, it takes a lot of effort and coordination to get this type of affordable housing in a community. And then it also allows the city to kind of take a look at our own code and see where our development regulations might be inhibiting the production of new affordable housing, see where our code is working and where it might need some touching up to allow for more affordable housing development in the future. And I actually forgot to mention kind of what the flexibility that was offered to each of these projects, but generally, parking is one that we offered reductions on a lot. Parking eats up a lot of land, is expensive for affordable development. Building height for DESC, and then just density. Allowing additional density was something that we usually had to offer in order for units to be affordable. So we have 3 projects in the program. We have space for 2. If anyone's interested in working with Burien, come talk to me afterwards. You only get this screaming deal for 2 more years, or until the end of 2024. So a really great time to get some flexibility on our zoning code. So with that, I will pass it over to Joyce. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. Wow, maybe I should have gone first. Parking doesn't seem that exciting after that. So just to give you a little bit of background on where we're coming from in Olympia, we currently have a population of about 69,000, but we're expecting to grow by an additional 20,000. We have about 31,000 housing units, but we anticipate we need about 14,000 more. We have about 54% of our households occupied by renters. About 37% of our households are cost burdened, and 15% are living in poverty. We need a significant increase in housing at all income levels, but especially at affordable levels. So we are looking to increase our housing supply by about 42% by 2045. I don't know that our public has quite grasped that yet, as far as like what that might mean in different parts of the city, but those are the numbers we're working with. So where are we getting our policy direction from for the ways that we decide to move forward on this? So first and foremost is our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan, actually I read it before I started working for the city of Olympia, and that's why I chose to work there. It's a beautiful, heartfelt plan, and you can tell there's a lot of community member involvement in it. But our plan has several goals and policies around infill in our residential neighborhoods. We direct growth to 3 high-density overlay areas, our downtown, and then one on the east side and one on the west side of town. And then we also have a lot of policy direction around supporting transit and reducing dependency on automobiles. And that also helps with our climate goals and some affordability issues as well. We are very fortunate to have a dedicated funding source for housing. We have our home fund, which is 0.1% of sales tax for affordable housing purposes. We had a community-led process where we worked on the urgent and emerging needs around homelessness, but also what were the broader community needs and long-term prevention strategies, and then also what can we do to help people experiencing homelessness from a human side of things, and then what can we do with and for the broader community as well. And we also worked with grant funding from the Department of Commerce to develop a housing action plan, and that includes some pretty specific actions for what the city will do to help address housing. We also have development regulations that are just policy in action. So for zoning, we have primarily focused on our permitting and our parking and our middle housing types. For our engineering standards, we've been looking at utility connections and not requiring each unit to have its own meter in some cases. We've been looking at provisions to allow for phasing with certain types of housing, and then also when frontage improvements are required. And we have a pretty low threshold, and that adds a lot of cost to projects that aren't very big. So we're kind of missing some of those smaller infill opportunities. We've also been working on our impact fees over the last few years. We have kind of normalized where we break out the different costs for different types of housing units. And we've got reductions for affordable housing, and then we have some lower amounts for certain housing types. So I think the last year to 18 months has just been parking. I worked on 3 separate parking amendments, one around EV parking, which I'm not going to talk about today, and then one for the downtown, and then one for residential parking in general. And we handled them separately just because we didn't have everything quite lined up at the same time. But we have a provision in our code that does not require parking for residential uses in the downtown. But as you can see from the drawing on the left, it wasn't the same threshold for the whole boundary. And so part of it had 100% no residential parking requirements, but the other part only had 10%. And 10% is not a very big incentive. And we were hearing from developers who had come in for pre-submission conferences for residential housing projects in that area and then not come back. And so we were asking them why. And parking was a big part of why they weren't coming back. They just couldn't make it pencil with the parking requirements. And we have a lot of our downtown is built on fill, and we're very close to the Puget Sound, so underground parking is not really an option. And so it was just structured parking or surface parking, and that was expensive. So what we did is we went through the planning process and we essentially kept the outer boundary the same, but just made the entire area exempt from parking for residential uses. We were still getting residential parking. It was just coming in at what the market could bear. So we were getting about 0.7 spaces per unit rather than the 1.5 we require elsewhere in the city. And one of the things that was great about, I think about a week after this provision went into effect, there was a pre-submission conference and the developers had come in and they were all, here's all my documents on why I need a parking reduction. We're like, you don't need one. You're good to go. So that was great. It was just perfect timing for that. But really what we focused on was residential parking overall. And in our housing action plan, we have a goal of expanding the overall housing supply. And we want to make it easier to build housing. We want housing at every income level. We just need a lot more housing. One of the specific implementation strategies was to reduce parking requirements for residential uses, including for multifamily developments near frequent transit routes. And we don't have any big major like transit hubs or anything like that. But we have some good corridors with frequent transit. And so we defined frequent transit as a stop that had service 4 times or more per hour for at least 12 hours per day. So I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. This took months to get through all of this. So our previous code requires 2 parking spaces for a home or a single-family home or a duplex or a townhouse. And then for apartments, it's generally 1.5 spaces per unit. So the staff's recommendation was for single-family homes and for duplexes to reduce it to 1 if you were within a 1/4 mile of frequent transit. And if you were in an apartment complex, which we define multifamily as 3 units or more. So if you had 3 units or more, it would be a range of parking, and anywhere within that range that was appropriate for your project based off of the developer's choices would be allowed. So that was 0.7 spaces to 1.5 spaces per unit. That also allowed us to take out a ton of other things in our code, like we had different parking standards for what's the word for like a studio apartment, and we had different requirements. It allowed us to get rid of all of those other little exceptions because they were all within that range. So the Planning Commission came back with a recommendation for no minimums. This caused our community to have a little mini uprising. I was still getting emails after the public hearing, before it went to City Council. It was crazy, even after the City Council took action. And so they recommended no minimum for any residential housing type anywhere in the city, and they also recommended reducing the maximum amount from 1.5 down to 1.25. And we did hear from some of our affordable housing providers that they didn't want it to be reduced, so they wanted to keep it at 1.5. So what we do in the city of Olympia is after we have the Planning Commission recommendation, we go to the council's Land Use and Environment Committee, and they kind of might make a couple of suggestions before they forward it on to the full city council. And so they recommended the Planning Commission's proposal. It wasn't unanimous. It was the first time I've ever had something go through the committee that wasn't unanimous before it went to city council. But they did add a provision that except for within the downtown boundary, which we keep separate, anywhere else, if you had 5 units or more, you would have to provide at least 1 accessible parking space. And that is because the building code requirements for accessible parking only kick in if parking is provided. It doesn't require it, and so they wanted to make sure there would at least be 1. And 5 units or more is also our threshold for when we require land use review. So we had a review process that would be a little more publicly viewable rather than just a building permit application coming in for 4 units or less. What was actually adopted was still different. So they made it so that any residential unit within 1/2 mile of those frequent transit areas would not have to provide any parking, but they kept the max at 1.5 spaces per unit. And for single family and duplexes and townhouses, they made it 1/2 a unit, 1/2 a parking space per unit, which is really interesting. But there's no maximum when you meet all of your other development standards. And that's how we currently handle most of our low-density residential zones. Most places have 2 to 4 parking spaces, 2 in the driveway, 2 in the garage, or if it's tandem, 1 in the driveway and 1 in the garage. But they did require that for 3 units or more, it was half a space per unit to 1.5 spaces per unit, and that was kind of a nod to a lot of the public comments they were getting. And then again, they kept the accessibility parking requirement. But what I like about this particular proposal is how it lines up with Olympia. So this is kind of specific to Olympia. Hopefully you can see on this map, the green area is the city limits. Those pink dots are our frequent transit stops. And if you can kind of make out that pale yellow buffer, you'll see that it includes a large portion of the city, and then also kind of down on the lower left where we have South Puget Sound Community College is covered as well. But what I really like is how well this lines up with our future land use map. This is the connection between our 3 high-density nodes. This is where we will have the majority of our residential development in the next 20 years. We currently have a downtown sub-area plan. We are currently working on the sub-area plan for the Capitol Mall Triangle, and they exempted that area from residential parking requirements as well. So huge relief to that particular sub-area plan. And I talked about parking today, but we are doing so much more in the city of Olympia. Like I said, we do have our home fund, and we've had it for a few years now. We've got projects on the ground. We've got projects in construction. We amended our housing code, our emergency housing code, a couple of years ago, and we have some language in there around coordinating with some of our partners at the faith-based organizations. And so we have some of the churches, and I don't know that we're working with any mosques or anything yet, but we have some of the local churches providing tiny houses on their property. We have expanded our multifamily tax exemption program, and we are looking at expanding that again. We have some tiny home villages that we work with partner organizations to operate for us, but they're on city land. We've been working on renter protections, and some of those are adopted in the municipal code already. We do have partnerships with supportive housing services and some of the other faith-based organizations. We do have crisis response and peer specialists on staff that are out in the community dealing with people in our downtown or in any of our homeless encampments, and we're trying to get them into city-sanctioned housing, even if it's not, real, true, permanent housing. We have the community court, which works with people on other solutions to, drug use or other types of problems, so that it's not a punishment, it's more of an opportunity for healing. We have our rental housing registry and inspection programs under consideration that we're looking at. We're also exploring how we can address things like extra fees that are in leases or rental agreements, how we can help people have the ability to install AC units so that they have more ability to survive these heat experiences that we're seeming to have now. And I just wanted to touch on something that we're doing that has been fairly successful for us. In our housing action plan, we also have policies around land banking and donating or leasing surplus property for development. The city council's been supportive of this. We've had some successes so far. We will sell the land at a minimal price with the requirement that it's used for affordable housing in perpetuity. So we've done that in a couple of instances and have a couple more in the works that we're looking at. We're currently working on a similar project that Burien has with Habitat for Humanity on a townhouse and multifamily project that would have some ownership opportunities, which is exciting for us. So it's kind of all hands on deck. We're looking at anything within our code, whether it's the zoning code or the development regulations or any programs around how we can get housing, get affordable housing, and keep housing. That's it for me. Thanks.
All right. Well, I want to thank the panelists here. Thank you so much. And all of this is to illustrate that there are a variety of solutions that local governments and planners are working to use to meet the housing needs that every local community has. But they have to be tailored to the local community. So as you saw, there's that parking regulations. Parking is one of the top tools that local governments have been using in the Puget Sound region to help make more affordable housing, but it has to be locally tailored. So we encourage you to reach out to your local planners through the comprehensive plan process, help to understand what are the best tools and levers that local governments can use to support affordable housing. And now I'd like to open it up for questions if there's time. Let's check the time. All right, we have 10 minutes for questions. Yes.
Hi, this is Kevin from Commerce. I have a question for Ted, actually. In Seattle, so you were talking about density areas, and there's the low density areas and then the high density areas that are on designated corridors. In Seattle, I've noticed that those high density corridors are mostly strobes or large unsafe for pedestrian streets. Is that the case in Tacoma as well, where the density is correlated with wider streets? And if so, is there any discussion with the Department of Transportation about potentially road diets or increasing pedestrian safety for multifamily residents on those streets?
That is a hard question. I should have you attend my coworker Elliot's session next and ask him. Tacoma does have some very unsafe streets, and I would have to look back at the map to see if we have densified those streets. We also have some areas that are fairly narrow that we're upzoning. Those neighborhood nodes as well are fairly narrow. We are improving our pedestrian orientation. But yeah, absolutely. It's sort of we have to do them both together. Is how do we improve pedestrian safety? How do we do street improvements? And how do we build housing at the same time? And one of the things we're concerned about is beyond just improving safety, the infrastructure under the ground is really, really expensive. That might be our biggest concern, to be honest. And so I'd have to look at the map to give you a really good answer, which is, I have it on my phone, but I don't want to waste your time scrolling through my phone. But yeah, we do have some really unsafe streets. We're working on a Pac Ave sub-area plan, which is one of our enormous streets. I mean, it feels like a highway, to be honest. And so we're looking at that right now, and we'll be looking at that in the next couple of years. So how do we strategically pair pedestrian safety and housing? But it's definitely not something we've solved.
Olympia has an example she wanted to share about.
One of the things I wanted to share in the city of Olympia, our transportation planners worked on our transportation master plan a couple years ago, and we identified the locations where we would want mid-block crossings, largely based off of points of interest like schools or parks, and trying to coordinate that with transit and where people are coming from and where they want to get to. But that was a huge part of our transportation plan. So Michelle Swanson at the City of Olympia might be a good contact.
All right, any other questions? All right, and there, yeah?
So I'm a social worker who works with older adults. I have some thoughts about the parking thing. So, and this is specific to senior, affordable housing properties. Is that one of the things that we're seeing is there's a lot less parking being attached to those, right? For all the reasons you guys are saying. One of the unintended consequences of that, though, is that, as folks age, they oftentimes need caregiving support, and we don't have anywhere for caregivers to park. Like literally within a mile of the property, there's no parking, no street parking, nothing. And if you look at who is providing our ongoing caregiving support, it's usually women from historically marginalized communities. So they are walking on streets and unsafe to be able to access those communities to provide caregiving support, which then what is happening is that seniors are not getting caregivers because it's not accessible for their caregivers to come to them or all of that. So I just kind of wanted to say that is for you guys to think about that it's an unintended consequence, but it's having really big impacts. And we need to think about that.
No, that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up, and we can share that with planners outside of this avenue. But making sure that you have, that balance those competing interests, but also make sure that you have the parking that's needed for employees too, as a piece of the puzzle. Great point. Yes?
Question for Ted.
Oh, yeah?
As you look at your comprehensive plan, as you're thinking about the future, has there been any discussion about what to do around ground floor retail or just activating the ground floor as a whole? Because that's always one of the things that's incredibly hard to fund from an affordable development standpoint.
Again, I would say you should attend Elliot's presentation next month.
Can I speak to that, actually?
Yeah, totally.
So-
I don't know what Tacoma's doing.
So, yes, so the question was, how do you activate the ground floor of residential buildings, particularly when it's very difficult to get retail and affordable housing projects, because that typically kicks in prevailing wage and other requirements. What we had done in a former jurisdiction I worked for is we looked at the vision for the community and tried to understand what the competing interests were. And then when we approved the plan, we made sure that the space was flexible and allowed for future retail use, but met the community's needs short-term and allowing residential development with the provision and for the building itself to allow future conversion when the market was right and allowed it to happen. So I know that there's been lots of discussions in all of our transit-oriented development grant programs about that specifically. I'm happy to put you in contact with somebody who's been working through that. But that's one example. Do you have any other examples? Yeah? Okay, Joyce?
After we did our sub-area plan for the downtown, because we wanted to add 5,000 new residents in our downtown from our last comp plan update, we did go back and look at which streets were required to have ground floor retail. We did reduce the number of streets that require that, and then we have some provisions around, how a multifamily lobby can count towards that, or having some common space on the ground floor. But just a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit.
Yeah, and we did try to make sure in this project that I was talking about, having those more active uses of a residential building be towards the street where you wanted to activate it. So the lobby, the fitness, if there was a fitness unit or fitness center, and those community spaces, so that it was as activated as possible, with the understanding that it might not be possible to do retail at that time. I'm going to take one from the back. Yes.
I just had a question and a comment. The question goes to the selection of the sites that Alex identified for those projects. How was the community involved? And the comment that I wanted to point out was that regarding social services, I have an older adult parent who is, 1/3 of Washington, who's over 65, died of dementia. So we have caregivers, 7 that come to the house, and so the rapid location buses, none of them come by car, they all come by buses. So having buses proximate to those places where no parking is provided might obviate that need. So that was just a comment.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's definitely on point. We just got the Rapid Right H line in Burien, and that's part of our long-range planning strategy, is how can we get as much housing and as affordable as we can that's within close proximity to that Rapid Ride line. Regarding site selection for the Affordable Housing Demonstration Program, it's really initiated by developers who see opportunities of where they can develop. So the city doesn't really have a hand in selecting the sites. It's really kind of opportunistic, as like what's available, what can we make work. But the fact that we opened up single family residential zones, that's 70% of Burien's geographic area. So that just made it easier to kind of have more sites to choose from that might not be fully developed right now. So we didn't always, we got one project that's right downtown, really conveniently located, but the process for site selection is really what can a developer use an opportunity for, what can they make work for their priorities and needs in partnership with the city.
All right, I'm afraid this will have to be probably our last question, but I'm happy to stay, and I think some of our other speakers might be also willing to stay, and of course, some of us might be around for the conference. So, last question?
Thank you. I had a question about the 30% AMI property, the DESC one that you had shown, assuming there's no voucher subsidy tied to it, is there a long-term OMS contract with Commerce, or what is and is there a way to determine that that funding will be permanent if you're a provider
Yeah,
on that building?
I'm not sure about their long-term funding sources. I can speak a little bit about how they operate. They do, this is a permanent supportive housing project. It's for disabled people, people with, severe mental health challenges that are probably going to live there until they need a higher level of care long-term. They'll be charged, and I might be saying stuff that you already know, but for the group here, they are charged 30% of their income, whatever that income is, and that helps to subsidize the long-term operation of the project. Aside from that, I don't know what their exact long-term funding sources are. But yeah, I'd be happy to look into that for you.
The question is mainly about the vouchers and the competition for project-facing property like that. If you were trying to operate it with half subsidy, because the rental income from the actual residence is quite low.
Right.
And we operate an 80-unit building, for example, that requires so many different layers of funding. So
I'm gonna pause just a second. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
We're happy to take questions afterwards, so thank you.